Annette Moore was seated in her worn armchair, the floral fabric having long lost its vibrant colors. Her gaze wandered over the neglected backyard, where tall grass whispered with the cold autumn wind. Dead leaves danced in small whirls, painting a picture of abandonment that, in a way, mirrored the emptiness in her heart. It was a gray Saturday afternoon, and the clouded sky seemed to carry the same weight that Annette felt in her soul. She sighed deeply, letting her memories take her back to the days when the house was filled with laughter and lively voices. "Ah, Robert," she murmured, her thoughts returning to her deceased husband. "You always knew how to keep this garden as alive as our love." The sounds of the television in the background were just a murmur compared to the orchestra of thoughts playing in her mind. With each rare visit from her children, she hoped to reignite the warmth of family, but those moments were cold and calculated, tinged with the expectation of some financial gain. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Annette leaned on the arm of the chair, struggling to her feet. Upon opening the door, she found her son William, whose hurried smile barely masked his true intentions. "Hello, Mom. Just stopped by to see how you're doing," he said, his voice carrying a note of urgency that Annette knew all too well. "William, my dear, it's always a pleasure to see you," Annette replied, forcing a smile as she made room for him to enter. William looked around, his gaze quickly scanning the room for anything of value. He then turned to his mother, attempting to keep the conversation light. "Mom, you know I always worry about you, right? How are the finances? Need anything?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Annette led him into the living room, offering him a seat beside her on the sofa. She knew of William's intentions, yet maternal love prevented her from confronting him directly. "Oh, I'm fine, my son. But tell me, how's work? And your siblings, have they come to visit too?" William shifted uncomfortably under the question. "Ah, you know how it is. We're all very busy, but I make it a point to stop by whenever I can." The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall, marking the passage of time and the growing distance between spoken truths and those uttered. "Mom, actually, I was thinking, maybe you could help me with a small loan. Just until I get things sorted at work. Things are a bit tight." Annette looked at William, her heart tightening with the familiarity of the situation. She sighed, nodding her head. "Of course, my son. I'll see what I can do for you," she said, rising to fetch her checkbook, each step heavy with the sadness of knowing that the love she offered was now a currency for exchange. While Annette was in the bedroom, the figure of Henry Thomas emerged from the house next door. Newly arrived in the neighborhood, he observed the interaction between mother and son through the open window, his instinct telling him that something was not right. Henry, a man who had lived long enough to recognize pain even from a distance, decided it was time to do something. After all, he knew the value of good neighborliness and the weight of loneliness. Annette returned to the living room with the check in hand, handing it to William, who could barely disguise his relief. "Thank you, Mom," he said, standing up quickly. "I promise it's just temporary help." "I know, my son, I know," Annette responded, her voice laden with melancholic hope. William hurried out, leaving Annette at the door, watching his departure. She then noticed Henry across the street, his look laden with concern and understanding. That simple gesture of recognition was enough to ignite a small spark of hope in Annette's heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was not as alone as she thought. Henry, realizing it was time to intervene, decided that the next day he would make a visit. Perhaps he could not fix a family, but he could at least ensure that Annette knew someone cared. With that resolution, he retired, planning what he would say the next day when he finally knocked on Annette's door. The next day, with the sky still clouded and a gentle breeze blowing through the bare trees, Henry Thomas prepared for his mission of courtesy. Wearing his thickest coat, he slowly walked through his meticulously maintained small garden, which contrasted vividly with Annette's neglected yard. Henry, with his silver hair and eyes that told stories of decades past, carried with him a life of experiences and a deep understanding of the loneliness that often accompanies old age. He knocked gently on Annette's door, his taps resonating with a mix of hesitation and determination. After a few moments, the door slowly opened. Annette appeared, a fragile figure with disheveled light gray hair and a surprised yet warm gaze. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Henry, your new neighbor. I noticed we moved in around the same time and thought we should get to know each other," he said, with a kind smile. Annette, somewhat surprised but visibly touched by the gesture, opened the door wider. "Oh, how kind of you, Henry. Please come in." "Don't mind the mess," she replied, her voice carrying a tone of gratitude mixed with embarrassment. Henry entered, observing the living room that, although clean, showed clear signs of wear and neglect. They sat down, Annette in her usual armchair and Henry on an opposite sofa, facing her with an expression of friendly concern. "Annette, I hope I'm not being intrusive, but I couldn't help but notice that your garden seems a bit forgotten. If you need help taking care of it, I'd be more than happy to offer my assistance," offered Henry, his voice full of genuine willingness to help. Annette smiled, touched by the offer. "That's very kind of you, Henry. The truth is I've become a bit less active lately, and my children, well, they have their lives and rarely have time to help." Henry nodded, understanding the delicate situation. "I know how it is. My own children also lie far away. Sometimes, life takes us down lonely paths, doesn't it? But, see, I believe that good neighbors can become a chosen family. If you don't mind, I'd love to help wherever I can." Annette, visibly relieved and encouraged by Henry's kindness, began to open up more. "You are very kind, Henry. Knowing that I have a neighbor like you already makes me feel less alone. Having someone to talk to is a great gift." They talked for some more time, sharing stories of their lives, the laughter and the sorrows. Henry quickly realized how strong and resilient Annette had been and still was. However, the conversation soon turned to Annette's current situation, and she, confident in Henry's compassion, revealed more about the difficulties faced with her children. "Henry, I really didn't expect to have to talk about this so soon, but you have such an easy way of conversing. My children have been, well, less than attentive," Annette sighed, a shadow of sadness passing through her eyes. "I understand, Annette. You are not alone in this. We'll find a way to make things better around here, you'll see," Henry responded, his tone determined and reassuring. As the clock ticked marking the passage of time, both felt that a bond was being formed, a bond of understanding and mutual support. Henry, now aware of Annette's loneliness and challenges, was more determined than ever to make a difference in the life of this new friend. With the conversation drawing to a close, Henry stood up to leave. "Well, Annette, I'll let you rest now. But remember, I'm just next door, and I'll be here for anything you need. Let's start with that garden tomorrow, if you agree." "Oh, Henry, I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much," Annette replied, accompanying him to the door with a smile that hadn't appeared in a long time. Henry waved back and walked to his house, his heart heavy, but hopeful. He was already beginning to plan ways he could bring some comfort and joy to Annette's life, starting with the small gesture of caring for the garden, which now seemed both symbolic and practical. As Annette closed the door behind Henry, she felt a bit lighter. The unexpected arrival of this new friend was like a ray of sunshine on her cloudy autumn day. Tomorrow would be a new day, and for the first time in a long time, she had something to look forward to. And with that thought, she prepared for a night's rest, not before making a small prayer of gratitude for the neighbor that life had brought her. The following morning, under a gray sky that promised another rainy afternoon, Annette prepared for her weekly shopping. She donned her most comfortable coat, grabbed her worn-out purse, and with a modest shopping list in hand, headed to the local supermarket, a small store that still retained the charm of a simpler era. Upon entering the supermarket, Annette greeted the cashier, a young man named Tom, whose friendly smile always made her feel a bit more welcome in the small community. "Good morning, Mrs. Moore. How are you today?" asked Tom, as he rang up items for other customers. "Good morning, Tom. I'm well, thank you. And how are you?" responded Annette with a shy smile. As she walked down the aisles, Annette carefully picked the items from her list: some vegetables, bread, milk, and a small packet of tea. She was mindful of her limited budget, mentally calculating the total cost as she added each item to her cart. When she reached the checkout, she placed her groceries on the counter. Tom began to scan the items, maintaining light conversation. "Looks like it's going to rain again, Mrs. Moore. Better carry an umbrella today, huh?" "Yes, it looks like it. I brought one just in case," Annette replied, nervously watching as the total increased on the display. When Tom announced the total, Annette felt her heart tighten. She rummaged through her purse, counting the notes and coins with trembling fingers. Her expression fell when she realized she didn't have enough. "Oh, it seems I must have made a mistake with my accounting. I'm sorry, Tom, maybe I should." She began to put aside the milk and bread, the less essential items, but the voice of Emma Thomas interrupted her thoughts. "Please, let me handle this, Tom. I'll cover the difference for Mrs. Moore," said Emma, who had entered the store by chance and observed Annette's uncomfortable situation. Annette looked at Emma, her eyes brimming with gratitude and embarrassment. "Oh, Emma, I can't let you do this. I simply must have miscalculated my expenses." "Annette, please, think nothing of it. It's my pleasure to help," insisted Emma, handing her card to Tom. "And perhaps we can enjoy a cup of that tea together?" Annette, moved and slightly overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity, merely nodded, unable to find the right words to express her gratitude. "Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate it. You are very kind." "It's nothing, Annette. That's what neighbors are for, right?" Emma smiled warmly. As they left the supermarket together, Emma placed a comforting arm around Annette's shoulders. They walked slowly back to Annette's house, where Emma prepared 2 cups of hot tea. Sitting in Annette's cozy kitchen, the two women began to talk. "You know, Annette, Henry and I always think of the community as a big family. If there's anything more we can do to help, please don't hesitate to let us know," Emma spoke sincerely as she served the tea. "I don't know how to thank you both, Emma. You've come into my life like a blessing. I was beginning to feel so alone," Annette confessed, holding the cup with both hands, feeling the warmth of the tea spread through her fingers. The conversation between them flowed naturally, covering topics from family recipes to memories of happier times. Emma, with her maternal instinct and genuine care, listened attentively, offering words of comfort and encouragement. As the tea dwindled in their cups, the afternoon passed gently, and the friendship between Annette and Emma solidified, woven by the delicate threads of compassion and mutual understanding. Emma, realizing how deep Annette's hidden despair was, decided it was time to talk to Henry about more concrete ways to help their new friend. The two women parted with a warm hug, promising to meet again soon. Annette, now a little lighter in spirit, watched Emma leave, feeling infinitely grateful for this new friendship. As soon as Emma left Annette's house, she knew she had something important to discuss with Henry. It was clear that more needed to be done to alleviate Annette's burden, and she was determined to be part of that change. With a plan beginning to form in her mind, Emma quickened her pace, eager to share her ideas with Henry. Emma arrived home to find Henry in his office, surrounded by papers and books. Her expression carried an urgency that immediately caught Henry's attention. "Henry, we need to talk about Annette. I saw her at the supermarket today, and she was struggling to pay for her groceries. I helped out, but that's just a stopgap. There's something deeper going on, and I think we need to do something more substantial for her," said Emma, her tone mixing concern and determination. Henry looked up at Emma, his own worries mirrored in her eyes. "I've been thinking the same thing, Emma. Actually, I have a friend, James Scott, a lawyer. He could help us better understand Annette's legal situation, perhaps even investigate if there's something we can do to improve her financial condition," suggested Henry, reaching for the phone. Henry quickly called James, who agreed to come the next day to discuss the case. Known for his competence and compassion, James was the perfect choice to handle a delicate situation like this. "Henry, thank you for calling me. I'm always willing to help, especially in a case that seems to touch so deeply on issues of justice and dignity," James said over the phone. The next day, James arrived at the Thomas residence. After a brief exchange of greetings and a cup of coffee, they sat down in Henry's office. "So, Henry, tell me everything about Annette and her circumstances," requested James, preparing his notepad. Henry and Emma shared everything they knew about Annette, from the death of her husband to the neglect of her children and her precarious financial situation. James listened attentively, occasionally making notes. "Interesting. You mentioned that Annette had a husband who died a few years ago. Do you know if there was any will or life insurance?" James asked, looking for possible unexplored sources of income. "We're not sure, James. But something tells me we might be dealing with more than just family negligence here," Henry responded. James agreed to start a preliminary investigation. He began by checking public records and legal documents related to Annette and her late husband. What he found was intriguing. "Henry, Emma, I found something quite curious in the records. It appears that Annette's husband was a minority partner in several local businesses, some of which are still operational. And more interestingly, there seems to be an unexplored connection to a tycoon who recently passed away," revealed James, his eyes lighting up with the discovery. "A tycoon, you say? That's surprising. How does this relate to Annette?" asked Emma, puzzled by the information. "Well, it's too early to say for sure, but it appears that this tycoon had no direct heirs. If we can establish a legitimate connection between him and Annette's husband, we might discover that Annette could be entitled to a part of the estate," explained James. The trio discussed the best way to proceed. They decided that James would continue the investigation, trying to unravel the web of connections and, if possible, find concrete evidence that could help Annette. "I'll need some time to dig deeper into this, but you both did well in bringing this to my attention. I'll do everything I can to bring some justice for Annette," promised James as he prepared to leave. "Thank you, James. We know we can count on you," said Henry, walking his friend to the door. With James now involved, Henry and Emma felt a renewed hope. It was a mystery that needed solving, and perhaps, just perhaps, they could change Annette's fate for the better. As James departed, Henry's mind was already in motion, considering all the possibilities this revelation might bring. Knowing the next steps would require patience and meticulous investigation, he returned to his office, thoughtful about the impact their actions could have on the life of Annette, a woman who had quickly become much more than just a neighbor. After intense hours scouring the connections and possible legal ties of Annette to the estate of a tycoon, James realized that the cooperation of Annette's own family would be crucial. Specifically, he needed information that only Mary, the youngest daughter living abroad, could provide. He sought through various channels to contact her, but encountered numerous obstacles due to her location and time zone differences. Eventually, after sending emails and leaving messages on various communication services, Mary finally responded. James picked up the phone with a mix of anxiety and relief when he heard her voice on the other line. "Mary, this is James Scott. I'm a lawyer and a friend of Henry and Emma Thomas, your neighbors." James began, trying to keep his tone as informative and gentle as possible. "Oh yes, Henry mentioned they had a lawyer friend. How can I help you, Mr. Scott?" Mary's voice carried an understandable caution. "Mary, we have some very important matters to discuss regarding your mother, Annette. I'm afraid her circumstances here are concerning, and I'm investigating some legal issues that might be of interest to your family." Mary paused for a moment, clearly impacted. "What's happening with my mother, Mr. Scott? I knew she was facing some difficulties, but John always told me it was nothing serious." "Well, Mary, I'm sorry to say that your mother's situation is quite severe. She's been facing significant financial challenges, and there is a possibility that she might be the beneficiary of an unknown estate from a distant relative. We need your help to explore this possibility." The news clearly shook Mary, who took a few seconds to respond. That's a shock. I had no idea. John always downplayed anything I mentioned about my mother's situation. He said everything was under control. I understand it's difficult, Mary, but your mother needs you now, more than ever. If there's any chance you can come here to discuss this in person, I really believe we could resolve these issues more effectively. I will come back, Mr. Scott. I need to see my mother and take care of this personally. I'll talk to John about this, but... She hesitated, a new suspicion tinting her words. I will start making arrangements to come back as soon as possible. Thank you, Mary. Your mother is lucky to have a daughter like you. We'll be here to help with whatever you need when you arrive. Thank you, Mr. Scott. I really appreciate this. I'll get in touch as soon as I have my flight itinerary. After hanging up, Mary sat down, stunned by the news. Looking around the apartment she shared with John, she began to question how much she really knew about the actions and intentions of her partner. The doubt gnawed at her, and she decided to confront John as soon as he returned home. When John entered, Mary was waiting, her posture tense and her eyes full of unspoken questions. John, we need to talk about my mother. Her voice was firm, a clear indication that she would not accept evasive excuses. Of course, what's going on? John tried to maintain his tone light, but Mary's seriousness disarmed him. Why did you never tell me things were so bad for her? The neighbor's lawyer called me. There's an inheritance involved, and my mother is in a terrible financial situation. Why did you downplay all this? John stuttered initially, surprised by the accusation. Mary, I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to worry. Protecting me? Or protecting yourself? Mary's doubt was palpable. I need to think about all this. Now, I need to plan my trip. I'm going home, John. I need to be with my mother. John tried to argue, but Mary was already decided. She immediately began packing her bags, her mind swirling with the preparations for the trip and the reunion with a mother she hadn't seen in years. Meanwhile, John watched, realizing that things between them might never return to what they were before. As Mary prepared to leave the country and reunite with Annette, the gears of fate began to turn, promising revelations and confrontations that could change their lives forever. After a tense and reflective journey, Mary landed at the airport, her heart heavy with concern and determination. She quickly hailed a taxi, her mind spinning with the recent revelations and suspicions about John. As she approached her mother's house, the familiar scenery brought a wave of conflicting emotions. Upon arrival, she barely had time to absorb the sight of the time-worn house before being greeted by Henry, who was waiting for her at the door. His warm smile offered some comfort. Mary, it's so good to see you back, although I wish the circumstances were better, said Henry, helping her with her luggage. Thank you, Henry. How is my mother? Asked Mary, anxious and dreading the answer. Let's go inside. She's waiting. Henry led Mary into the house, preparing her for the reunion. As she entered, Mary was immediately embraced by Annette, who, despite appearing frail, exhibited a surprising strength in her hug. Oh, Mary, my dear, how I've missed you, exclaimed Annette, tears welling up in her eyes. I've missed you too, Mom. Don't worry, we'll sort everything out, Mary responded, keeping her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. After an emotional moment, Mary turned to the issues at hand. She knew she had to confront her brothers, William and Charles, who had been less than responsible in their duties towards Annette. Later that day, Mary called a family meeting in the living room. William and Charles arrived together, their expressions cautious upon seeing Mary. Mary, what's going on? Why the rush to come back? Charles started, trying to appear casual. We need to talk about Mom and how you've been taking care of her, or rather, how you haven't. Mary cut straight to the point, her voice laden with authority and reproof. What do you mean? We're doing what we can, responded William, clearly defensive. Doing what you can. I was informed that Mom is living in deplorable conditions, while you two seem to ignore her basic needs. That's not doing what you can, Mary confronted, her disappointment and anger clearly visible. Mary, we have our own lives and problems. It's not that simple, Charles tried to justify, avoiding Mary's gaze. Nothing justifies leaving our mother in this situation. I was away, yes, but I trusted you to take care of her. And what do I find upon returning? Neglect. Mary was seething, each word charged with the weight of her perceived betrayal. Look, Mary, it's not all our fault. You were also... William started, but was interrupted. I was sending money and trusting you. I expected you to look after our mother. But that's going to change. I will take legal action if necessary to ensure she gets the care she deserves, Mary declared, firm in her resolution. The brothers exchanged glances, realizing that Mary was no longer the sister they could easily manipulate or dismiss. She was serious and determined to make changes. We'll see what we can do to improve things, Mary. We don't want legal trouble, said Charles, finally yielding under Mary's relentless gaze. Good. I'll be staying here with Mom until we have a lasting solution. And I expect you two to start showing a bit more respect and care for her, Mary ended the discussion, making it clear that things needed to change. As William and Charles left, each lost in their thoughts, Mary sat next to Annette, holding her hand. She felt empowered by her decision to fight for her mother, but the weight of the impending battle was palpable. Now, more than ever, she was committed to transforming Annette's life for the better, no matter the challenges she would face. In the silence that followed, with dusk falling over the room, Mary began to outline her action plan. She knew the coming days would be crucial, and the decision she made now could define Annette's future. With that thought, she braced herself for the challenging days ahead, determined to restore her mother's dignity and quality of life. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma Thomas stood thoughtfully by the kitchen window. The behavior of William and Charles during the recent family discussion had sparked her suspicion and resolve. She knew something more drastic needed to be done to reveal the true intentions of the Moore brothers. Henry entered the kitchen, finding Emma deep in thought. Seeing the serious expression on her face, he gently asked, "What's on your mind, dear?" Emma turned around, her resolution clear in her eyes. "I've been thinking about Annette's situation. We can't let Charles and William continue to manipulate her, especially now that Mary is back and trying to make changes. We need a way to expose their true intentions for everyone to see." Henry nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "And what do you suggest?" he asked, ready to support any plan that could help Annette. "We need a trap, something that forces them to show their true colors. What if we simulated a meeting about the inheritance? We could make it seem like Annette is about to receive a large sum of money soon. I want to see how they would react to that," proposed Emma, her mind already weaving the details of the plan. Henry pondered for a moment, then nodded with determination. "It's risky, but it might just work. Let's talk to James and Mary about this. They need to be on board for it to go smoothly." The next morning, Emma and Henry invited James and Mary to discuss the plan. Seated in the living room, Emma laid out her strategy. The idea is to create a scenario where Charles and William believe Annette is about to inherit a large amount of money. We'll observe how they react to this news and whether it leads them to display greedy behavior or even take actions that can be clearly seen as exploitative, explained Emma. Mary, still absorbing the complexity of the suggestion, felt somewhat hesitant. "It's a good idea, but what if it leads them to do something drastic? I'm worried about Mom's safety," she said, concern evident in her voice. James, who had brought his legal expertise to the meeting, nodded in understanding. "We'll need to set up some safeguards, of course. We won't leave Annette unprotected at any time. Plus, we can use this as a way to really understand how far they're willing to go," he added. "And what if we also use this as an opportunity to strengthen Mary's legal position?" If the brothers act inappropriately, it could give Mary more leverage to act on behalf of her mother, suggested Henry. Everyone agreed the plan was risky, but necessary. They decided that the supposed meeting about the inheritance would be held at Annette's house, where they could control the environment and ensure everyone's safety. We're going to need your help to make this look convincing, James. Could you, for instance, act as if you are organizing the legal details of the inheritance?" said Emma, looking at the lawyer. "Certainly, I can do that. I'll create some documents that look legitimate for the meeting. That should lend credibility to our scenario," agreed James, already thinking about the details he would add to the documents. With the plan set, everyone felt a mix of nervousness and hope. If everything went as planned, they would finally have something concrete to protect Annette from the schemes of her own sons. As preparations for the fake meeting began, Emma felt empowered by taking proactive action. She knew the coming days would be crucial and could very well define Annette's future. With Henry by her side, and now with the support of Mary and James, she was ready to face whatever came next. The day of the fake meeting about the inheritance dawned tense and filled with expectation. Emma and Henry had transformed their living room into a convincing setting for the gathering, with documents spread across the coffee table and James, dressed formally, prepared to act as the attorney in charge of the supposed will. Mary had called her brothers, Charles and William, informing them of an urgent meeting to discuss important details of the inheritance that could benefit them all. Though skeptical, their greed prevailed, and both confirmed their attendance, eager to learn more about the fortune they believed was within reach. "Remember, just follow the plan and let me do most of the initial talking," instructed James, adjusting his glasses as Mary, Emma, and Henry nodded, each masking their nerves with a layer of determination. When Charles and William arrived, they were greeted by James at the door. He welcomed them with a professional seriousness, leading them into the room where the rest of the group awaited. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming so promptly. We have some very important matters to discuss," James began, indicating chairs for them to sit in. Charles and William exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of anxiety and poorly disguised greed. "So, what exactly is this inheritance about? How much are we talking here?" William asked, getting straight to the point. "Well, before we discuss specific amounts, it's important to understand some legal details and the conditions of the will," James replied, starting to describe complex legal terms to gauge their reaction. As James spoke, Emma watched the brothers' body language closely, noting how their eyes lit up each time the word money was mentioned. Mary, on the other hand, felt a mix of sadness and anger seeing her brother's reactions, strengthening her resolve to protect her mother from any future exploitation. Suddenly, the front door opened, and two police officers entered discreetly, followed by an attorney specializing in fraud and financial abuse. The brothers, surprised and alarmed by the unexpected arrival, quickly stood up. "What's going on here?" Charles demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we need to discuss some irregularities that have arisen concerning your dealings with your mother, Annette Moore's funds," said the attorney, while the police officers remained close, ensuring the situation remained under control. Charles and William began to protest, their voices rising in self-defense, but the evidence presented by James and recordings of previous conversations that suggested their interest in manipulating Annette's inheritance were devastating. "This is absurd. We've done nothing wrong," exclaimed William, desperately looking towards Mary for some form of alliance. "William, Charles, all we did was to show how far you're willing to go for Mom's money. This ends now," Mary spoke, her voice firm and filled with moral authority. As the brothers were questioned by the police, with the attorney noting down every word, Emma approached Mary, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did what had to be done, Mary. It was necessary to protect your mother," Emma said kindly. Mary nodded, looking sadly at her brothers, now wrapped up in their own justifications and excuses. The room, once filled with tension and anticipation, now resonated with the promise of justice and protection for Annette. With the trap concluded and the true characters of Charles and William exposed, The next step would be to deal with the legal and emotional repercussions of the confrontation. As the brothers were taken away for further questioning, Mary prepared to face the future challenges, now stronger and more determined than ever. In the tumultuous scene that unfolded after the entrance of the police and the fraud attorney, the Thomases' living room transformed into an informal courtroom, where long-hidden truths finally came to light. Charles and William, still stunned by the sudden turn of events, found themselves facing Mary, who held a thick dossier of documents and recordings. With a face marked by cold resolution, she began to detail each accusation. "Charles, William, you may think you managed to hide your schemes, but I have everything here I need to prove otherwise," Mary said, her voice firm, echoing in the tense room. She then pulled out a series of bank statements, email correspondences, and recordings of phone calls that detailed the suspicious transactions and conversations both had had, discussing how they could financially benefit at the expense of their mother. "Here's a statement showing a large withdrawal you, William, made from Mom's account on the day she was in the hospital for an important appointment. And Charles, this email between you and Jennifer discusses how you plan to persuade Mom to give you more money for that supposed real estate investment, which never existed." Mary presented the evidence, handing copies to the police and the attorney. Charles attempted to interrupt, his face pale with anger and fear. "That's an interpretation. It means nothing more than normal care for our family finances." "Normal care. Is that what you call draining your mother's account while she can barely afford her own needs?" Mary countered, her indignation rising. William, seeing the seriousness of the situation, tried a different approach, his voice choked by panic. "Mary, we are family. Can't we resolve this among ourselves? Why bring the law into this? Family." Mary almost laughed, but there was no humor in her voice, only deep sadness. "Family takes care of each other, William. What you've done has nothing to do with care. It's exploitation. And no, this isn't something we can just resolve among ourselves." The attorney, observing the interactions and reviewing the evidence, intervened. "Based on the evidence presented by Mrs. Mary and preliminary investigations, it appears there is a significant case here. I recommend we move forward legally to ensure that justice is served and that Mrs. Annette Moore is protected from further abuses." Charles and William exchanged desperate looks, realizing that their attempts at defense were quickly crumbling. I'm sorry, Mary. I didn't want things to come to this," Charles finally conceded, his facade of confidence shattered. "Sorry isn't enough, Charles." "Not after everything that's happened," replied Mary, her heart heavy both with betrayal and the necessity of confronting her own brothers in this way. As the meeting drew to a close, the police prepared to take Charles and William for further questioning, and the attorney assured Mary that they would begin preparing the case for court. As the door closed behind her brothers, Mary sat down, exhausted by the tension of the confrontation, but relieved to have finally taken steps to protect her mother. She knew the coming days would bring legal and personal challenges, but she was resolved to face them. In the quiet that followed, Mary reflected on the family ties that had been irrevocably altered. She wondered if there would ever be a way to rebuild those bridges, or if some actions were simply unforgivable. With these heavy thoughts, she prepared for the next chapter in this tumultuous saga, determined to fight to the end for her mother's well-being, no matter the personal cost. After the dramatic confrontation, Charles and William were taken into custody, their protests and pleas for mercy echoing faintly as they disappeared from Mary's sight. The police escorted them to the car, ensuring that the law was waiting to address their transgressions. Mary remained in the room, the weight of the events just beginning to settle. She felt a mix of relief and sadness, relief for finally having protected her mother, and sadness for the irreparable rift that now marked the bonds of her family. Meanwhile, Annette sat in a comfortable chair, watching the scene with an expression of helplessness and sorrow. Mary approached her, holding her hand tenderly. "Mom, it's going to be all right now. I promise I will do everything to protect you," said Mary, her eyes meeting Annette's, conveying a sincere promise. Annette, with teary eyes, nodded slowly, squeezing Mary's hand in response. "I know, my dear. I never doubted you. It's just so sad to see how far things have gone with your brothers, Annette spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. I know, Mom. It's painful but necessary. Now let's focus on rebuilding your life and ensuring you have everything you need, Mary responded, determined to turn the page on that painful chapter of their lives. In the days that followed, James worked tirelessly to ensure that the inheritance transfer was processed smoothly. He arranged meetings with banks, adjusted documents, and made sure all legal safeguards were in place to protect Annette from future exploitation. When the day of the formal transfer of the inheritance finally arrived, Mary and Annette were present in James's office, watching as he finalized the procedures. Everything is ready now, Annette. The estate is officially transferred to your name, and we've taken all measures to protect you and your assets, announced James, handing her the final documents. Thank you, James. I don't know what I would have done without your help, and without my Mary here, Annette said, looking at Mary with a smile of gratitude. It's my pleasure to help, Annette. And remember, we're here for anything you need in the future, James replied, his professional tone softened by genuine warmth. With the inheritance secure and the legal measures in place, Mary and Annette felt a sense of closure and a new hope for the future. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that promised peace and security after so much turmoil. Mom, how about we celebrate a new beginning? We could go out for dinner tonight, just the two of us. It'll be our way of starting to rebuild, suggested Mary, excited by the prospect of moving forward. I would love that, dear, Annette replied, the relieved smile on her face lighting up the room. As they prepared to leave James's office, Annette paused for a moment, looking at Mary with a thoughtful expression. Mary, what are we going to do about Charles and William? Despite everything, they are still my sons. I know, Mom. We'll deal with that together. With time and perhaps a bit of forgiveness, maybe we can find a way to move forward as a family again. But for now, let's focus on you and your happiness, Mary responded, offering Annette both comfort and realism. With those words, they left the office, ready to face whatever the future brought, secure in the knowledge that they were protected and supported by each other. With the sun setting in the background, they headed for a new beginning, leaving behind the shadows of the past and looking forward to a brighter future. After the turbulent revelations and substantial changes in her financial and family life, Annette and Mary began the process of rebuilding. The atmosphere, though still laden with shadows of the recent past, now had an air of hope and renewal. One afternoon, as Mary helped Annette pack her things in the old house, their conversation flowed more freely than it had in years. You know, Mom, I always imagined coming home under happy circumstances, maybe for a holiday or a celebration. I never thought it would be like this, Mary said, sealing another box of memories. Life has a strange way of bringing us back to what's important, doesn't it? Annette replied, her hand lingering on an old photo of the whole family together. But I'm so grateful that you're here now, no matter the reason. Me too, Mom. And I'm looking forward to seeing you start a new chapter in a place that will truly be a home for you, Mary said, offering an encouraging smile. With Mary's help, Annette moved into a new house, carefully chosen for its brightness, comfort, and proximity to nature. The home had a small garden in front, where Annette could tend to her plants, a hobby she had neglected during the years of turmoil. On the first morning in her new home, Annette woke up early, the sunlight filtering through the curtains and warmly lighting up the room. She walked to the window, watching the dew glisten on the garden flowers. Mary joined her, wrapping her arms around her from behind. It's a new day, Mom. A beautiful day, Mary said softly. Yes, it truly is. And I have so many plans, Mary. Maybe I'll even start a gardening club here in the neighborhood. What do you think? Annette asked, her spirit invigorated by the prospect of new activities. I think it's a wonderful idea. It will be good for you to socialize more and do something you love, Mary responded, enthusiastically supporting the idea. In the days that followed, mother and daughter dedicated themselves to decorating the new house, choosing each piece of furniture and decor with care, ensuring that every space reflected the new phase of their lives. Mary was especially attentive to Annette's needs, ensuring that the house was not only beautiful but also practical and comfortable for her. One afternoon, while organizing some books on the living room shelf, Annette looked at Mary and said, "You've brought so much light into my life since you came back, Mary. I couldn't face all this without you by my side." "I'll always be here, Mom. We've been through a lot, but I believe things will only get better from here," Mary replied, squeezing her mother's hand affectionately. With the house finally in order, Annette and Mary decided to host a small housewarming party, inviting Henry and Emma, as well as some new neighbors. It was a joyful evening, full of laughter and warm welcomes, symbolizing Annette's acceptance into the community and the beginning of her new life. As the guests chatted and enjoyed a carefully prepared buffet, Mary watched Annette laugh and interact with everyone. It was evident that, despite all the hardships, Annette's resilience and ability to renew were a force to be reckoned with. Mary felt a deep admiration and gratitude for her mother, strengthened by the journey they had traveled together. With the house echoing with joy and new beginnings, Annette and Mary knew that while the path ahead might have its challenges, they were prepared to face them together, supported by a community that valued and respected them. The night gave way to a feeling of contentment and optimism, promising a future full of possibilities and renewed joys. As Annette and Mary celebrated the beginning of a new phase in their lives, John found himself thousands of miles away, sitting alone in his now empty apartment. The news of Mary's departure had left a void that echoed off the stripped walls. He looked at the objects she had left behind, each a poignant reminder of the love and trust he had betrayed. John spent his days brooding over the events that led to his isolation. It had started with small lies, minor diversions that, in his mind, wouldn't be missed by someone with Annette's apparent financial security. But these actions grew, fueled by justifications that now sounded hollow and selfish. On a gloomy afternoon, as rain beat against the apartment windows, John received an unexpected visit from his lawyer, Mr. Hammond. The lawyer entered, his face carrying a gravity that immediately put John on alert. "John, we need to discuss your legal options and the potential repercussions you may face for your actions," Mr. Hammond began, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. "I understand, Mr. Hammond. I really didn't think things would get to this point." John ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of despair and regret. "John, the evidence against you is substantial. You diverted funds that were not yours and harmed people who trusted you. There is now an ongoing investigation, and the charges are serious," the lawyer explained, flipping through some documents. John listened, each word adding weight to the burden he already carried. "Is there any way I can make amends for the damage I've caused? Any way I can make it up to Mary and her mother?" John asked, his voice choked with emotion. "You can start by returning the money you diverted, which will certainly help your case in court. But moral reparations, that will be a harder path, John. Trust, once broken, is complicated to rebuild," Mr. Hammond advised. In the following days, John made the difficult decision to sell most of his possessions to begin repaying the money he had diverted. Each item sold was a painful reminder of the cost of his wrong choices. On one particularly lonely evening, John sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating the letter he wrote to Mary. In the letter, he expressed his deep remorse, his words meticulously chosen in the hope of conveying his sincerity and his desire for change. "Dear Mary," he wrote, "there are no words that can adequately express the remorse I feel for everything I have done. I betrayed not just your trust, but also that of your mother. I am committed to doing everything in my power to repair the harm I have caused, even knowing that some wounds may never fully heal." Sealing the letter, John felt a mix of relief and deep sadness. He knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges and that his actions would have lasting repercussions. But, for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face these consequences and try to redeem himself. As John faced the reality of his actions and the potential legal consequences, he began to understand the true extent of what he had lost, not just financially, but in love and trust. As he prepared for the legal process and possible redemption, He reflected on how his life had been irrevocably altered by his own behavior. Thus, with the letter to Mary sent, John anxiously awaited a response, aware that any hope of forgiveness would be a precious gift and perhaps a first step toward rebuilding his own life. The sun shone brightly that morning, symbolizing a new beginning for Annette. With financial stability secured and a new home that welcomed her with comfort and warmth, she felt rejuvenated and ready to give back to the community that had supported her during her most difficult times. "Mom, you seem so thoughtful today. Is everything all right?" Mary asked, noticing Annette's contemplative expression as she looked out at the flower-filled garden through the kitchen window. "I'm more than all right, dear. I was just thinking about how I can use my situation to help others. There are so many facing challenges like I did, and now I have the means to help," Annette replied, her face lit up by a gentle and determined smile. She had a plan in mind, inspired by her own experiences and the discussion she had with Emma and Henry about the needs of the local community. Annette decided to open a community center for seniors, a place where they could gather, engage in activities, and receive assistance with legal and financial matters. "I was thinking of opening a community center, a place where our elders can feel valued and supported, where they can learn, socialize, and get help when needed. What do you think?" Annette shared her idea with Mary, eager for her opinion. "I think it's a wonderful idea, Mom. It's so generous of you to think of others, even after all you've been through. Let's do it together," Mary responded, her enthusiasm evident. In the days that followed, Annette and Mary worked together to turn the idea into reality. They found a suitable location near the city center, accessible and spacious enough for the various activities they planned to offer. They hired workers to renovate the space, making it welcoming and accessible for everyone, regardless of their physical limitations. Annette also reached out to professionals from various fields, such as lawyers, doctors, and social workers, who could offer their services regularly at the center. Her vision was to create a program that not only entertained but also informed and assisted. "How's the center project going, Mom?" Mary asked one morning as they had coffee together. "It's going very well. We're almost ready for the grand opening. I thought of calling it New Dawn Community Center. A symbol of hope and new beginnings, don't you think?" Annette responded, the satisfaction in her voice reflecting the progress they were making. "Perfect, Mom. New Dawn sounds exactly like the fresh start many need," Mary agreed, smiling in admiration of her mother's resilience and generosity. As the opening day approached, excitement in the community grew. Annette, with the help of Mary and their new friends, prepared an opening ceremony that would include a tour of the facilities, speeches from community members, and a buffet prepared by a local restaurant. The center quickly became a pillar of the community, a testament to Annette's indomitable spirit and her belief in the goodness and collective strength of people. She often spent her days at the center, engaged in activities, sharing stories and wisdom with others, and delighting in the joy she had brought to so many. As New Dawn flourished, Annette reflected on her journey, gratified to be able to turn her ordeal into a legacy of care and support. Knowing she had given something meaningful back to the community, she looked to the future with a heart full of peace and purpose. The New Dawn Community Center had become a symbol of renewal not just for Annette, but for the entire community. The walls echoed with laughter and conversations, and Annette often found herself in the midst of it all, happy to be surrounded by friends and community members who had come to respect and love her space as a gathering and support hub. On a sunny afternoon, while the center was particularly lively with a group of seniors participating in an art class, Annette sat with Mary in a small garden they had planted in the center's backyard. As they watched some members painting, Annette shared her reflections. "You know, Mary, sometimes I wonder how all this came about. There was a time when I thought my life was coming to an end, that there was nothing left to look forward to." Annette spoke, her eyes lost in the movement of the brushes. "Mom, you turned that pain and uncertainty into something so beautiful. This place, these happy people. It's all a result of your strength and determination." Mary replied, proud. "I've learned so much, you know. I learned that it's never too late to start anew, and that even the darkest moments can lead to bright mornings. Annette continued, a gentle smile playing on her lips. And I've learned that people are incredible, that support can come from where we least expect it. As they talked, an old friend of Annette's, Georgia, approached. She was one of the many people who had reconnected with Annette through the center. Georgia, with her vitality and contagious enthusiasm, had been instrumental in organizing many of the activities that now enlivened New Dawn. "Annette, dear, you won't believe what I brought today," Georgia exclaimed, joining them on the bench. In her hands, she held an album of old photographs. "Remember this?" she said, opening the album to a page that showed a group of young, smiling women. "Oh, my goodness, of course I remember. We were so young." Annette laughed, flipping through the album, each photograph awakening a dormant memory. The trio spent the next hour reminiscing about stories from their youth, each anecdote bringing a new wave of laughter or a reflective pause. These moments of connection and remembrance were precious to Annette, reinforcing her belief in the power of community and friendship. The afternoon passed quickly, and as the sun began to set, Annette found herself surrounded by friends, both old and new, and by the family she still had. The gratitude she felt for each person present was immense, and she knew that without the community she had helped foster, her life would be much less rich. "Mary, look at all this. Do you think your father would have been proud?" Annette asked, a tear of happiness sparkling in her eye as she watched everyone around. "He would be more than proud, Mom. He would be amazed," Mary responded, holding Annette's hand affectionately. As the day gave way to night, Annette felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Life at New Dawn was more than she could have hoped for, and as she prepared for another night's rest, she knew that each day was a blessing, each friendship a treasure. She fell asleep with a heart full of love and a spirit renewed, ready to continue making a difference in the lives of those around her. As the sun rose over the city, Annette and Mary prepared for one of the most significant days on the New Dawn Community Center's calendar: the event to raise awareness about elder abuse and neglect. Both felt a mix of nervousness and determination, as the day represented not just the culmination of their efforts to improve the community, but also an opportunity for Annette to share her story and inspire change. Early in the morning, volunteers began to arrive, setting up chairs, distributing informative pamphlets, and preparing the stage for speeches. Mary oversaw everything, ensuring that each detail was meticulously coordinated. "Mom, how are you feeling about the speech today?" Mary asked, approaching Annette with a cup of tea in hand. "I'm a bit nervous, it's true, but more than that, I'm determined. Today isn't just about my story, it's about giving a voice to those who have been silenced for too long," Annette replied, accepting the tea and offering an encouraging smile. As the event began, the square in front of the center was filled with people of all ages, signaling the impact New Dawn had already made in the community. Annette took the stage to warm applause. She looked out over the crowd, took a deep breath, and began. "Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are here to discuss a topic many prefer to avoid: elder abuse and neglect. I myself was a victim, silenced by those I trusted the most. But my story is not unique, nor should it be seen as an isolated case." Annette began, her voice firm and clear. "Around the world, countless elders suffer in silence. Today, I ask all of you to join me in fighting against this injustice. Let's create a community where respect and care for our elders are not just expected but demanded." As Annette spoke, her passion and sincerity touched the hearts of the audience, many of whom began to share their own experiences. The event became a powerful forum for discussion, with people from various parts of the community offering support and resources to combat the issue. After the speech, as the crowd slowly dispersed, an elderly woman approached Annette with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Annette, your speech today changed something in me. I have been suffering in silence, afraid to speak out. But today, I feel that I can and must seek help," the woman said, holding Annette's hands. "You are never alone," Annette replied tenderly, embracing her. "And you've taken the first step by speaking now. We'll ensure you get all the support you need." Mary, watching the interaction, felt immense admiration and pride for her mother. She knew that Annette's decision to turn her pain into action had started a wave of change that would only continue to grow. At the end of the day, as mother and daughter walked back home, they reflected on the events. "Do you think Dad would have been proud of us today?" Annette asked, her tone nostalgic. "I know he would be, Mom. You gave many here the same hope he always had in you," Mary replied, holding her mother's arm as they walked under the sky now painted with the colors of twilight. Annette stopped, looking out at the horizon. "Today, we've left a legacy of love and resilience. And as long as I have a voice, I will continue to use every moment to make a difference." Annette's legacy, strengthened by adversity and renewed by hope, continued to inspire and motivate everyone around her. Through her determination and the love shared with Mary, she had redefined the meaning of resilience and compassion in her community and beyond.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.